Good evening. We're going to skip the long-winded intro and unfortunately, another potentially depressing episode. As everyone knows by now, the cinematic legend, in so many different ways, passed this morning at the age of 89. Robert Redford, if he had just been a film actor, that's all he did, he would go down as one of the great stars in the history of cinema. Just as an actor, as a performer, as a leading man, as a bankable movie star, he's on the short list of all timers. But then you take into account the fact that he was an Oscar-winning filmmaker, and I just talked about Quiz Show, the movie that he directed, which was released 31 years ago, I think 3 days ago. And if Francis Ford Coppola is considered the godfather of a kind of new American cinema, certainly cinema in the post-World War II era, but we could say starting in the mid to late 1960s. If Francis Coppola is the godfather of American cinema, well, Robert Redford is the godfather of American independent film. And losing an icon such as him, especially, it doesn't make it easier or better if you know that someone is sick or has been sick. But there was the shock of this because he appeared just by inference. It didn't seem as if he was. It didn't seem as if he was in the last stages, and it came as a shock. And the reason why I even said that is his friend and collaborator, former collaborator, Paul Newman. People were waiting for Paul Newman to pass. His health went downhill hugely, and it was liver cancer, and there was no way back from that. And it was tragic and horrendous when Paul Newman passed. He was Newman was born in 1925, and he died, I think, 2008. So, I mean, he was in his early to mid 80s. But it wasn't a shock. It was like just a matter of time. And getting the news today, a friend of mine sent me a GIF. It was a shot from the movie The Natural, my single favorite movie with Robert Redford and my favorite performance by Robert Redford. There's a moment in the film where his character of Roy Hobbs is kind of a Babe Ruth squared. He's starts the film as a pitcher, the best left-handed pitcher anyone's ever seen, and he then becomes a Babe Ruth squared hitter. He basically says someone like this couldn't exist. He would be better than Babe Ruth, and that's not particularly realistic, but it's kind of the point. It's a fantasy. The character has ups and downs. There's a moment in the film where he is in Chicago at what's supposed to be Wrigley Field, and he just turns his head to look at someone in the stands. And it's one of many iconic shots of Robert Redford in that movie. And a friend of mine sent me that GIF, and I knew immediately what it meant without it being told. And then I saw the text below that said RIP, but I didn't even need that. I knew what it meant. And I felt really, really gutted. And when I think of people in Hollywood, whether it's actors, producers, directors, when Stanley Kubrick passed in 1999, it was a bit of a surprise. And Stanley was only 70 or 71. He was not old. And then when they said he died of natural causes, they thought maybe he worked himself to death because he was pulling 20+ hour days trying to complete Eyes Wide Shut. That was a bad one. That was really bad, especially because Kubrick, I mean, you look at the guys now, you look at Spielberg and Scorsese and Coppola, still working full schedules. You know, Spielberg is pushing 80 now. Coppola and Scorsese are in their 80s, and they're still, and you love to see it, but they're still going full steam. And Kubrick was 70 or 71, and he was gone. And this really feels like, even though it's almost absurd to say it, but it almost feels like losing a family member. It's completely insane. I never met Robert Redford. I never was close to meeting him. I don't know geographically in my life, in his life, like what was the nearest amount of miles? Was he ever on Long Island? I don't know. But I never met him. I never had the opportunity to meet him. But there was something in his work that felt very sort of tethering and connecting, that he wasn't just some random actor or filmmaker or producer. He was somebody who he wanted to be more than whatever it was that he was doing at the time. And one of the quotes that I read from him today, which I didn't know, is that life is about continuing to keep climbing the mountain. It's not about climb the mountain to reach the top. It's about continuing, keep pushing, and keep striving for more. That's where the fun is. It's in the challenges of continuing to put forth effort in whatever endeavor, lights your own personal fire. And that's how he lived his life. When he succeeded just as a film actor, he wanted to do more. He wanted to be a filmmaker. He wanted to get involved in independent film. And the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival is him, one of his most famous characters, the Sundance Kid, with the aforementioned Paul Newman, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And one of the, if you want to say what ifs, is that Newman and Redford worked together in two award-winning films, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in the late 60s, a Western, a kind of an anti-Western, a revisionist Western, not the level of Unforgiven, but a revisionist Western nevertheless. And then The Sting, which won all the hardware, Best Picture, Best Director, George Roy Hill. And there was talk starting at some point in the 80s that the two guys were trying to find another project, but it would have had to have been one hell of a script to be worthy of their talents, together. But I really felt terrible. I felt awful. I feel this loss, even though he got so much out of life. 89, still active, and somebody who he made his home. He lived quietly. I know this is a cliche, but there are some showbiz people who don't live quietly even after retiring. But in the case of Robert Redford, he really did enjoy being in nature. That was not make-believe. That wasn't for the cameras, movies like, Jeremiah Johnson. He really, when he wasn't working, wanted to live a quiet life. And he was a conservationist. He believed in, protecting forests and stuff like that. He was somebody who spoke about climate change decades ago. I mean, the first I heard of, they didn't call it climate change, but I feel like global warming, the first time that I heard that phrase it was more than 3 decades ago. A totally different kind of an argument, and the discussion nowadays. But he was somebody who talked about climate change before it was fashionable to even have people arguing this way or that way about it. But he was aware of his surroundings. He was always more of a kind of a global citizen than just an activist for one cause or another, or a movie star, at the Oscars saying something ridiculous like in the 90s where there were so many different people in different years saying things where it's like, what are you doing? And then that was famously Jim Carrey when he got up there one year, and I think it was 99, where he said, don't you love when people come in here and whatever cause they're into, and then he screamed, Viva El Salvador at the top of his lungs. And thank you very much. But Redford was the real deal. He really was a visionary, and he really was somebody who tried to light the creative fires in as many other people that he met as he could. And there aren't that many people in the movie business who you almost never hear anything negative, like not even the slightest bit of negative about them. The two people that I will name for sure, Audrey Hepburn and Paul Newman. Good luck finding anybody, and not just because you don't want to speak ill of people who have passed, but there wasn't anybody saying anything negative about Newman. It's just what a stand-up guy he was. And it almost feels like it was meant to be that those guys were going to make the two incredibly successful movies together, and they were going to be friends until the end of Newman's life, because they were both people who saw a larger world than just the insular world of Hollywood. And, making money and providing for your families for generations, all of that stuff is great. But Newman, with the the product lines of Newman's Own, and the just unfathomable philanthropy of Paul Newman. I mean, dollar for dollar, he might be the most generous person. Like, forget Hollywood. He gave almost everything to charity. It's just crazy what he did. And, you know, not ripping on anybody, but at CBS News this morning, I mean, it's kind of funny. It's not really an insult, but they did a little bit of a roundtable. I think Gail King and whoever else was on there. I forgot the name of some of the other reporters, but they were, you know, they were kind of in shock. And one of them, they were crying when they got the news. And there was a reporter there, one of the five in this kind of roundtable, who, as they were going over some of their favorite movies with Redford and Al Roker was at Al Roker. He said his favorite movie with Robert Redford was Sneakers, which is one of my favorites too. But one of the gentlemen on the panel said, and don't forget the salad dressing. They all jumped in. Now, wait a minute. That was his friend. That was Paul Newman. And the guy goes, oh my God. He was so embarrassed. Like a rare light moment on a day like today. But it showed that the two guys, they were more alike than different, because Redford gave a lot of money to various causes, not as much as Newman. Newman's process was different. It was just totally different as far as whatever his worldview was. And there's a famous multi-millionaire named Bill Perkins, who was a hugely successful. He plays poker now, in addition to giving away money. But he says his goal is to die not broke, but as close to broke as possible. But you can't take it with you. Paul Newman subscribed to that. Perkins might have got it from him. But Redford was an immensely charitable person, not just with his money, but with his time and with his kind of industry, in how he, you know, spoke to people in the business. He was always very curious, asking questions. And the fact that, like, if you were to go on YouTube and see various news organizations talking about him, whether it was, you know, the ABC, CBS, NBC, or any of the other networks, CNN, Fox, if there are multiple people discussing him, even now or this morning when the news broke and people were trying to figure out how are we gonna frame this, what should we focus on, whatever the case might be. But it's the fact that people, if they're asked what's their favorite Redford movie, and I understand if you're under 30, you're just going to say, you know, one of the MCU films that he appeared in, because he has not been that active and was not that active as an actor outside of the MCU in quite some time. But there are so many different movies that people who are movie fans but not necessarily in the business could name. Just on that CBS program, they named 5 different movies. I think Gail King said that her favorite film with him was Up Close and Personal. Now, that's not a very, no offense, it's not a good movie. That's a film, as I said during the episode of To Catch a Thief, that's a film about 2 movie stars. It was supposed to be about the famous female telejournalist, and somewhat controversial in her day, Jessica Savage. And it was rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. And then Scott Rudin came on and he said, we are no longer making a film about Jessica Savage. We have Robert Redford. We have Michelle Pfeiffer. We're making a film about what? We're making a film about 2 movie stars. So Up Close and Personal, a film about 2 movie stars. But it's the kind of big, brassy romance a lot of people like. Someone else mentioned The Way We Were, famously with Barbra Streisand. Another one said Barefoot in the Park with Jane Fonda. And Jane Fonda, of course, commented on it. She said she was crying all morning. I know that she's also not the most popular person in certain circles, but I mean, you start running out of legends, whether or not you're fans of them personally. These are people whose artistic works, for better or worse, have helped to shape the culture. Remember, movies inform culture, culture informs movies. It is symbiotic. This is something that I learned more than 3 decades ago. My old NYU professor, Robert Sklar, in his book, Movie Made America, that's what the whole book is about. It's showing that each doesn't exist without the other. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And as Robert Redford got older, he focused more on the outside stuff. He became a little bit more hesitant to do certain projects. But you get to be this age, upper 80s, hell, 70s, like Stanley Kubrick. 70, 71 when he passed, he looked older. And it's not like he had that, I shouldn't say that hard of a life, but in the case of Stanley Kubrick, he wasn't a drinker, he didn't smoke. Robert Redford looked fantastic for his age, but you say, now there's only three. There were like the four legends all born within 1 year of one another, and Robert Redford, Warren Beatty, Dustin Hoffman, and Jack Nicholson. And now we have Jack and Warren and Dustin, and he's the only one, Dustin, who is still working at this point. And it's just sad. I know it's part of life. We all get older, we all die. But there are some people that we kind of wish we could put them in a bottle, I guess. Clint Eastwood is 95 and he's still looking at scripts. He wants to make another movie. How is that even possible? But it's kind of difficult to explain. And going on social media, looking at, for example, Instagram, you see people of all different worldviews and philosophies. And you hate to say that a passing of someone like Robert Redford will have people who normally disagree about everything in agreement on what an important, trailblazing, incredible figure he was. And it doesn't always have to be that a person, you don't have to preface everything by saying, and we disagreed on almost it's fine. You don't need to do that. But the number of different people in the movie business, from the top end, Leonardo DiCaprio on down, who have said basically the same thing. This guy was a shining light. This is one of the greatest lights that Hollywood ever had. He did everything well. And looking back on his career as an actor, if we just look at the kind of performance style, he was known as somebody who didn't really act in the conventional sense. Ironically, he started on the stage, so he was trained. But he had a very natural way of delivering lines that didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded more off the cuff. And there were people who would say he didn't seem as if he was acting. And a film that he made, because he did make a lot of movies with political content, sometimes more overt than others, like the Michael Ritchie film where he plays a presidential candidate. The film is just called The Candidate. There were people saying, he's so good it doesn't seem like he's acting. And then the counter argument was, but he's not acting. He's reading his lines like a regular guy. Well, if it's believable, if it makes you think that this character is not a character, but an actual person, well, then he did his job. Redford was not he was not a big personality as a performer. He was a kind of a tighter, his line readings were different. Because if you compare the performance style to the other guys in his class, and it was only those four, there's nobody that could even hold a candle to those guys from that age bracket. Because think about it. The Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman is gone, Robert Duvall, that group, those guys were all born 1930. And then you look at, for example, Pacino, De Niro, if you want to put Harrison Ford in there, different kind of performer. But like that's a different group. That's like 1942, 43, 44 or whatever. And then with these guys, Hoffman and Beatty, and especially Nicholson, were much bigger on screen. Al Pacino, much broader as a performer. I mean, Redford's performance style was closer to Clint Eastwood than anyone else as far as being able to, without having an incredible amount of range, but within a certain range, it's fucking magic. This guy is brilliant. And the roles which fit Redford like a glove, the part that he plays in The Sting, opposite Paul Newman's, Henry Gondorff, he's so good. Redford is so good in that film. And, his character is the lead. Newman, it's very much of a supporting performance there. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Oh, I hate when that happens. We'll cut that out later. But it's very much of a supporting performance by Paul Newman in The Sting. But the way that Redford and the character name is a ride. I always joke around about great character names and stuff like that. Johnny Hooker, great name. But the smile And that thing that the guys did with that and all the characters. It's such a fun movie. It's an enormously rewatchable film. Robert Shaw, amazing. He did Jaws a couple of years later. But there's almost too many classic films on his filmography. And I didn't love A River Runs Through It, a film where he does the voiceover, but he doesn't star in it. It was a big one for Brad Pitt. It kept his career going on an upward trajectory. And I never saw the Milagro Beanfield War. That got some Oscar buzz back in '88. My problem with Ordinary People is not that it isn't a fantastic film. It is. It is an unbelievably gutting and emotional movie. It deals with issues of loss and family in a way that I have never seen before and we're not going to see again. It gets into very, very gray area and difficult concepts, and it's to Redford's credit and the credit of his stupendous cast in very young Timothy Hutton and Donald Sutherland, the greatest actor never nominated for an acting Oscar, and Mary Tyler Moore, who is just devastating. It gets into areas that you just don't see in movies. It goes deeper than you would ever expect. But the problem with Ordinary People is that there's the year of Raging Bull. So I'll just leave that there. It was the year of Raging Bull. And it was the kind of beginning after Taxi Driver, where was Martin Scorsese's Best Director nomination? I mean, he got all the hardware at the Cannes Film Festival. Where was his Best Director nomination? How was Taxi Driver? It was the best movie of the year. I'm sorry, it's better than Rocky. It's better than Rocky. I love Rocky. Rocky is an extraordinary film, but it's not Taxi Driver. It's not Taxi Driver. And Martin Scorsese should have won the Oscar for directing. And when he did not win for Raging Bull in 1980, when he did not win for Goodfellas in 1990, we felt like he was never going to win. And then Scorsese ended up winning for a movie that I have in the bottom half of his filmography, sorry to say, The Departed, starring the aforementioned Leonardo DiCaprio and Jack. I think my favorite individual moment in any Robert Redford film is towards the end of The Natural, after, spoiler alert, his bat, Wonder Boy. Can't really use it going forward in the film. And it's a little bit of a plot point that he has helped the New York Knights, that's the name of the fictional team in the world of the film. He has helped him to build a bat. The character of Roy Hobbs made his own bat from a tree that was split open by lightning early in his life. He's a very handy, very clever guy. He makes a bat with a Bat Boy. And after he can't use Wonder Boy at a pivotal moment in the film, he just looks at the Bat Boy. And it's not really a big line reading, but it's the import in the world of the movie about how huge of a moment this is. Go pick me out a winner, Bobby. Just the way he says that line. It's the top 10 great lines in the history of movies as far as I'm concerned. Go pick me out a winner, Bobby. And there are other films in his career that are trifles, such as Legal Eagles from '86, directed by Ivan Reitman. It was his follow-up to Ghostbusters, and weirdly, they used a lot of the same locations in Legal Eagles. Legal Eagles, though, is a strange hybrid. It's a comedy and it's a suspense thriller, and there's a bit of a murder mystery angle with the Daryl Hannah character. Terrence Stamp, who also unfortunately passed not that long ago, has a kind of a funny supporting role. But that was a film that showed that Redford could be very funny. Screwball comedy stuff, not film comedies, not some of the laughs like, let's say, from The Sting or The Candidate, but he got to do a little bit of screwball, almost Fred Astaire kind of stuff in that movie. I mean, he's the best thing about the film. Deborah Winger, it was great. And Daryl Hannah looks great in that film. And as I say, Terrence Stamp, terrific. Brian Dennehy, the human cheat code supporting actor. But Redford, that's one, if you haven't seen, you want to go, what's a Robert Redford movie maybe I haven't seen? It was Redford's follow-up to, he had done The Natural, and then Out of Africa, which won umpty dozen Oscars, Best Picture, Best Director for Sidney Pollack. Legal Eagles, if you want something relatively light and see Redford, looking great, wearing hand-tailored suits, and all the women are throwing themselves at him, including Daryl Hannah, who's not really age appropriate, but you kind of go with it in the world of the story. Deborah Winger's character is much more age appropriate. Another film that came up that people talked about, All the President's Men, was an enormous hit. And yes, a political thriller, but another political thriller from a completely different angle, nothing to do with presidential politics, 3 Days of the Condor, which dealt with and deals with a series of assassinations, where I think Redford's character of Joe Miller, he was supposed to be bumped off. Whoever was going after his group, they didn't get him, and now he's got to figure out what the fuck happened. Was it the Russians? Was it our people? Was it spacemen? You don't know. That's a film I like but don't love. In the realm of 70s thrillers with political content, Marathon Man is to me much more exciting than 3 Days of the Condor, it's good, but there are stretches where the noose isn't tightened. There are stretches of the film where it doesn't play like a suspense thriller in the manner of Marathon Man. But Marathon Man is a political thriller more for the idea that you have a young Jewish man being menaced by a Nazi, and the Nazi means to kill him and his brother, and what are you going to do about it? So the politics are a little bit more subtle, if you will. Or there are other people who would say, no, the politics are actually more subtle in 3 Days of the Condor. In Marathon Man, they're beating you over the head with it. But I mean, that's really up for open to interpretation. And I mentioned All the President's Men, Dustin Hoffman, Marathon Man, Robert Redford, 3 Days of the Condor, the two guys, two of the four kings of acting with Beatty and Nicholson, making political thrillers. Warren Beatty, The Parallax View, 1974, political thriller. And Jack Nicholson, Chinatown, even though it's set in the 30s, a political thriller. The 70s were a great time for movies, in part because these very challenging films, sometimes the politics would piss off certain people if they, thought that the worldview was different. But these were films that were, like The Parallax View was about a series of assassinations that have nothing to do with, Democrat or Republican. And in Chinatown, the politics are more from the perspective of San Francisco politics. It's not like we're looking at Washington. No. We're looking at 1938 and all of this nonsense that's going on, in the San Francisco high command. 3 Days of the Condor, though, a very good movie. It's not as exciting of a thriller as either The Parallax View or especially Marathon Man and Chinatown. I mean, Chinatown's one of the greatest movies ever made, period. I mean, you could say that's Jack Nicholson's finest hour. That's how good Chinatown is. I don't know. I don't want to leave anything out as far as my favorites. I mentioned Sneakers, which is just an incredible film. That's another one that I would recommend for people who only know Redford a little bit or maybe in his older era. That was his last of what you would kind of call a conventional leading man role. He plays a leader of a gang of, they're like early phase hackers, but they're not quite hackers. But it's in that ballpark. It's sort of before the internet, but when you could hack into computer systems if you knew what you were doing. That is an incredible movie with one of the greatest casts, I'll say it, one of the greatest casts ever. James Earl Jones in a cameo at the end is a riot. You have Sir Ben Kingsley, and you have Mary McDonnell and River Phoenix, the late River Phoenix, Sidney Poitier, Dan Aykroyd, David Strathairn. It is just a crazy stacked cast with one Oscar nominee and or Oscar winner after another. All the people I mentioned were Oscar nominees and or Oscar winners. Just fantastic. Oh, and another movie that came up, if you watch some of the roundtable discussions on the various networks, E! Entertainment, another film which came up as a movie that I don't think is that great. First half is great, and then it's not so good. Indecent Proposal. An enormous box office hit. It basically was, Demi Moore tries to have her cake and eat it too. In the world of that movie, her character of Diana, and she's married to Woody Harrelson. And, actually a little bit of the political stuff in that film is that the early 90s recession ruins them, this young couple. They go to Vegas with their last like 10,000. And before they know it, they're beset upon by Robert Redford's billionaire, John Gage, who offers them a pretty good deal. Suppose, he says to Woody Harrelson, I were to offer you $1 million for one night with your wife. Now, the joke is the movie probably is better if it's Roy Scheider playing the billionaire, or Gene Hackman, or Dustin Hoffman, or Charles Bronson. If it's a normal looking actor. The fact that it's Robert Redford looking as good as Robert Redford was going to look in his mid to late 50s, it makes it almost unfair. Because the joke at the time, and people were talking about it, I mean, she might tell him, keep the million, I'm going to break up with my husband for you anyway. You know, some variation on it. There was a lot of laughs in the mostly pre-internet era about that movie, Indecent Proposal. But one thing that Redford did, it's important to note that even though he was not involved in the production of that film, he had great respect for the filmmaker Adrian Lyne, who also did Flashdance and Fatal Attraction, and also one of my favorite horror films, Jacob's Ladder. But Adrian Lyne he encouraged someone like Redford, who was already an Oscar-winning director a dozen years prior. Bob, I need you to talk to me. I want you to tell me what you're thinking. Don't act like this isn't collaborative. I know you're not a producer, whatever he says to him. So Redford wanted his character to be a little bit more sympathetic and a little bit more redeemable than what was in the script. If the part would have been played by a Dustin Hoffman, it would have been different, because I don't think Hoffman would have given this note. But Redford was insistent on this one point, and Lyne wasn't sure, but he let Redford go for it. You can decide for yourself, having seen the film, whether you agree with this. So in the original iteration, in the script that Redford signed up for, it's more than implied that the Demi Moore character is, the $1 million means she has to have sex with this guy. Which, again, looks like Robert Redford. It's not the end of the world if you want to go that route. Like, she wouldn't have gone if she was not, and this is part of the problem within the world of the film, the Woody Harrelson character of David. If she wasn't attracted to him, she probably would have told him to go to hell, even for, there's no amount of money. So that's where the casting of Redford made things arguably more interesting, because it puts Woody's character in such a bind. It's like, oh my God, fucking guy. But what Redford wanted was to make it clear that he was only paying $1 million for her company. She's not an escort getting $1 million for a night. And Redford talked this over, and he and Adrian Lyne went back and forth, and eventually Lyne said, you know what, Bob, I think you're right. I think you're right. So there is a moment in the film where Demi Moore basically says, do you want me to just take my clothes off now? And Redford's character of John Gage does not break pose. It's Redford's best moment in the film, where he basically says, I don't know what you were thinking or what your expectations were for this evening, Diana, but nothing is going to happen here that you don't want to happen. I paid that money for a night. That's it. The fact that they then have sex, that adds a lot to the story, and unfortunately, the second half of the film, it's not up to in my opinion, the caliber and the quality of the first half. But ask yourself, if you've seen the movie, was that a good decision, or did they make a mistake? Should Adrian Lyne have tried to talk Robert Redford out of that? So I feel like that was such a huge turn, they needed to make more adjustments for the second half of the story. But it just shows that Redford was not willing to simply show up and read his lines, that he was a very active collaborator and always wanted it to be a collaborative process. Even if he was just an actor, he was always looking to make the best possible product that he could. And that movie was an enormous, just a crazy level of box office hit, even though it mostly was ripped on by critics. A lot of critics said what I just said. The first hour of this film is terrific, and it kind of goes off the cliff. They didn't figure out late second act and third act. There's a lot of stuff where you can feel the gears of the plot turning, and you say, man, there was a better movie to be made. But you know what? Audiences loved it. And the fact that there were people saying, that's the Robert Redford film, that's the movie, just as Gayle King, up close and personal, really? That's your one movie? Yeah, what can I say? She's laughing. I mean, it was funny the way that she said it. But I'm trying to keep myself in a more lighthearted mood here. I have been pretty sad today. There was no warning that we know of, and I didn't have any time to prepare, as with Paul Newman, where I kind of, and not just me, but people in general knew that he was nearing the end. Uh, but Robert Redford, born August 17, 1936, passed September 16, 2025, a towering figure in the big world of Hollywood and cinema around the world. There's not going to be anyone like Robert Redford ever again. And he should be, stand alone, because he was a unicorn in almost every sense. And he will be missed. The world is for sure a dimmer place without him in it. And, both he and Newman were kind of modern day Renaissance men. They really were. They felt like they were more of later era than they were. It's just hard to believe that Newman's been gone as many years and that he would be 100. And there were people today, even on social media, that they couldn't believe that Redford was as old as 89, because he still seemed very spry. Not that long ago, he was in his early 80s the last time he appeared in one of the MCU films. But time does a number on all of us. And yeah, tonight I'm sad, and maybe I could watch The Natural for the 30th or 40th time. That's a film I've seen as much as almost any other movie. Ridiculous the number of times I've watched The Natural. Saw it in theaters. That might be the only Robert Redford film that I saw. No. Dad took me to see Sneakers. So we saw Sneakers in theaters and The Natural, and I think that's it. I don't think I saw any other films. I didn't see Spy Game or The Last Castle, the films he did in the early 2000s in theaters. I think that was it. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm just going to close this episode. If you know the name, if you haven't seen very many of his films, it's a really imposing and incredible filmography. Some of the great works of art in the history of cinema, and by all accounts, a pretty good guy. So I guess this is episode 612. Thank you for joining me on this somewhat somber day in the world of cinema. And hopefully the next episode will be much more lighthearted and upbeat. Peace.